Okay, guys, I think we're going to kick things off. I have no doubt that Andy will try and join later. But until he does, look, the, the AMA today is really about a roundtable discussion about the cloud computing space and the cloud gaming space, and really about the role of DePINs and decentralization within this cohort. So with that being said, Tarsif and Smiral, I have you guys here. One of the things that like we're getting a lot from the community in terms of question is like, how do you guys see the decentralized like physical infrastructure networks reshaping the gaming and tech business over the next 5 years? And like, what are the, from your perspective, what are the unique challenges like they pose, and how do you feel some of these industry players can overcome them? Would love to kick off the discussion, and then while we wait for Andy, would love to get your thoughts on that.
Sure. I can kind of jump in real quick here and kind of give my 2 cents on this. So, I think deep ins essentially are just kind of like a really massive paradigm shift when it specifically comes to the idea of cloud gaming and how it uniquely sort of enables it, right? So, I think when we announced the partnership with YOM, I did mention kind of how this really shifts what the fact that YOM is even capable of doing sort of like their cloud streaming, like gaming streaming platform today is kind of a testament to how far just technologies in general have come since sort of a lot of players previously have tried to do this and haven't necessarily succeeded. I think a lot of people in the audience might remember Google Stadia from maybe like 10 plus years ago, which was sort of like which kind of sort of bought this whole idea of streaming games from the cloud directly onto your device of choice or your browser or things like that. It kind of made it pretty mainstream, but it sort of ended up failing miserably because, I think at that time the technology wasn't necessarily ready. But I think, as things have progressed over the past several years, and I think, especially in the last couple of years, the deep in business model has really kind of started to be proven out. And I think a lot of the technological challenges that, maybe were hurting it in the past have been overcome, especially kind of as you can see, sort of how we built our deep in here at ionet. So I think what this really sort of enables is kind of really being able to sort of bring the compute node closer to the end user, right? And kind of solve a lot of the issues around um, related to sort of like streaming latency and ability to actually, play a game without sort of like lag or, just any sort of like delay, which are, absolutely critical. Because you can imagine most people can deal with some level of lag or some level of latency with like video streaming, but with gaming streaming, it really needs to have like millisecond level like latency, right? Because any instance of lag is going to completely ruin the end user game experience. And at the end of the day, you're really trying to compete against people who are running these games locally off their like console or their PC. So I think with Deepin's having come so far in terms of having really massive globally distributed node networks with high level GPUs and compute nodes, I think it sort of really establishes a great foundation for how the game streaming business model can really thrive and kind of, where we can continue to bring sort of like AAA games to the market and sort of essentially enable it to be streamed from any device out there.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly valid, and I'm sure the gamers amongst our nation and here listening in on this spaces will know the importance of that. Any delays within the gaming space, and it like just experientially is just a no go. And having a very robust network is going to be absolutely paramount. And just on that note, Smiral, I'm really curious to hear your perspective on this. Like, from a tech perspective, like how do you think deepins are going to be reshaping the gaming and tech industry over the next 5 years? And like, what are some of the like just to kind of elaborate on that, like what do you think are some of the challenges like that there are like existing, and how do you think like some of the industry players are going to overcome them to consider deepins as a very robust technology base?
Well, yeah, being an avid gamer myself, I've tried out a couple of cloud gaming, products, right? And as Tausif mentioned, we need incredibly fast networks to, actually make sure that the cloud gaming experience is good, right? And since latency is of a pretty high, it's pretty important that the latency for the cloud gaming stream is supposed to be less, because that can, basically give uh, your users a competitive edge on the gaming part, right? So coming to the DePINs, right? The way I see DePINs evolving and being able to provide, cheaper compute. Uh, a lot of these cloud gaming services, like Stadia, they had, done their pilot in the US, but as someone who was from India, I never got to play anything on Stadia because they never, launched a pilot in India. And that's exactly where DeepIns come in, right? We literally have compute all over the world, and that basically empowers, uh, uh, companies and organizations like YOM to come in and be able to, you know, start serving cloud gaming services literally in any part of the world, right? And depends, being uh, literally, in the same country as where the users are being served. The latency is supposed to be like quite less, and that would actually enhance the gaming experience for the users. So I think it's a perfect fit, and within the 5 years, in the coming 5 years, I think we're going to see even more such integrations coming in, and more such cloud gaming platforms trying to adapt to deepens, since it's quite literally a great fit for that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Smeral. Really, really interesting point there. And yes, guys, we have on Andy from YOM Network. So, Andy, first of all, a pleasure
Hi,
to have
guys.
you here. Thank you so much for joining. We were just talking to Tarsif and Smeral about like how they see DePINs reshaping the future of gaming and tech over the next 5 years, and what sort of are like some of the unique challenges that like we may be posing either on the gaming side or the deep inside, and how traditional kind of industry players can overcome them. So would love your
Brilliant.
perspective and what you see as some of the challenges and how you see the industry shifting over the next 5 years.
Yeah, that's great. Well, look, thanks very much for inviting us. Obviously, YOM is decentralized infrastructure. We're building out nodes which are on a peer-to-peer level. And I think one of the interesting things for gaming as opposed to AI is that gaming works very much on, let me put it differently, it doesn't work very well with centralized data centers. So what we found from our side is that when you look at companies like, and Smirl was talking about that a minute ago, when you look at companies like Google Stadia, they had centralized data centers. They have, each data center has massive kind of firewalls in it, and basically the latency and such like is super, super slow. Whereas what we find with DePIN, and this is only available through DePIN, you couldn't do it any other way, is by taking it to a peer-to-peer level, you effectively cut the latency out, and the latency goes from being, in the cloud gaming space, it can be over 100 milliseconds to under kind of 20, 25 milliseconds. Now, if you look at the kind of the issues with cloud gaming and the issues with Google Stadia, and this is part of the reason we believe that it closed down, was that the latency just made some games completely unplayable, and then the price meant that a lot of the games were being pushed to only be live for certain timeframes. Now, if you think about what game companies want you to play their games for sustained timeframes, and they want you to play it almost 24/7. And then if you think about Google Stadia, their cost is, I mean, the cost for AWS, for example, for a gaming rig to be running on there is something like 97 cents per hour. You bolt that in, you've effectively got a gaming company that wants one thing, and you've got a data center that wants something different. And then even if they manage to align on a pricing perspective, the latency just means that only certain games can be played, in this space. So, you know, I think whether it's 5 years or whether it's today, the DePIN network is really the only future of cloud gaming, and cloud gaming is really the way forward for gaming, in our opinion, anyway.
That's brilliant, Andy. Thank you so much. It is so interesting, right? Like this is the direction that the technology is going in. It seems like the only direction which actually makes technological sense at the moment in order to provide that scalability and sustainability for the demands of AI and obviously the GPUs, right? So thank you so much for answering that. We have another question, and this question is a little bit more focused on interoperability, because traditionally, getting the tech pieces to fit together like has and can be a challenge. But I'm curious, I'm going to point this question to Tarsif to kick off the ball. But Tarsif, look, interoperability between platforms like can sometimes be a barrier in cloud-based services. How do you envision like DePINs like fostering more of seamless on interoperability in cloud gaming? And like, what do you think is required from the industry at large to make like these shifts more seamless?
Yeah, I think I think that's an interesting question, and I think you can kind of take a number of different approaches to what interoperability necessarily means here, right? And I think for me, I kind of sort of like think of just how different games sort of fit together and how you sort of like really make a multiplayer experience like really seamless, right? Like I think historically, like there's been sort of like this idea of like a walled garden of games or like exclusives or like specifically like games that exist only on like specific consoles or for PC or things like that. And if you really wanted to kind of play like that game together with friends, like you'd need sort of like the same hardware or the same type of console and like same sort of like subscription service and things like that. I think what the cloud sort of like game streaming idea sort of really does well is kind of it abstracts away a lot of these concepts that sort of made gaming a lot more sort of like modular and made it a lot more sort of fractionalized because different people had different setups, different access to games. But realistically, with sort of a game streaming platform like YOM, a lot of that would be in the background and be abstracted away, and anyone who wanted access to any sort of game that is supported on that network should be able to kind of stream that from whatever device is supported, right? Especially with a peer-to-peer DePIN sort of underpinning that in the background. So I think that's something that's really exciting with a cloud-based service for gaming. I think it really sort of enables accessibility just across the board for a lot more people, for a lot more games, and kind of takes this sort of whole idea of interoperability, which has been sort of a bane in the existence of kind of gaming, like as a market and an industry previously. It kind of really takes that away and just makes sure that we're focused on customer experience and user experience first.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Very much in agreement with that, Tarsif. Bringing that question to you there, Andy, how do you envision like a decentralized infrastructure fostering a little bit more of like a seamless interoperability within the cloud gaming space?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say that hopefully Tao got the cash that I sent him for doing such a good sell on YOM. I mean, interoperability. I think when you deal with, and again he nailed it. You've got so many different platforms that are hosting on. It's really the orchestrator that needs to be built, which actually enables portals to engage between different platforms. And I think with gaming as a whole, the whole reason kind of Web3 gaming came along was because of this lack of interoperability, lack of ability for people to move products from one space to another. And I think that the way we envisage this at YOM is that YOM is the kind of almost like the central function which all the pieces move through. And when you think about it from that perspective, and again, I'm going to go into this, I'll probably go into this a bit more detail. The way I see it is you almost have got, you've got links via portals which enable people to take equipment via an NFT or a Web3 wallet from one space to the next. And I think, the way we see this is not as one massive, I don't want to call it metaverse because it's a bit unfashionable at the moment, but one massive experience with games all hosted within the same space. But really, it's multiple games that bolt onto each other in different ways, but are able to move seamlessly between the kind of different platforms. I mean, what is required to make this a reality? I mean, for us, it's really, working with you guys and getting our own network rolled out, because once we've got enough nodes out there, we can easily handle the interoperability between the different spaces, and again, just taking it to another point, the way we see it, because you would have, we can run a game in Telegram, we can run a game, the same game, well, because it's a URL, we'll be running on a website, and potentially we would be running in a kind of Steam or aggregator equivalent. All this is possible once we get our nodes kind of up and running. And again, I'll go into more detail about how ionet's working with this, but yeah, I think we're on track anyway. Basically, is the point.
Nice, Andy. Yeah, couldn't agree more. And Samaro, as someone who lives and breathes from a technology perspective, day in, day out, like, how do you see interoperability like changing within the cloud gaming space in order to make it more seamless?
Well, yeah, DePINs here could basically support enhanced interoperability through its non-reliant nature on a single provider's ecosystem, right? And you could basically have like uh, the same the same hardware being run, while you could stream the game on different platforms, making it a different experience. And even a portable experience would be super good in this case.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Look, I think like once we understand from like a technology perspective how all this is possible, the customer experience sits on top of all of this, right? And one of the questions that we have here from the team is really about understanding how the utilization and the innovations are ultimately going to affect that. So, Tarsif, I'll bring this question to you, but essentially people are asking, like, for Web3s and gaming organizations to like eventually take this for mainstream adoption, user experience and accessibility are going to be absolutely critical. So what innovations do you think are still like essential to make the decentralized gaming infrastructure as user-friendly and cost-effective as possible for both the developers and players?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and I think that kind of really gets to sort of what we're always trying to optimize for, right? Especially when it comes to decentralized infrastructure and our particular like GPU network DePIN as well. So I think what I would always say is like, and from terms of a user experience and accessibility perspective, I think we always kind of, and I'm just kind of speaking for ionet here, is we kind of essentially constantly have to compare ourselves to what the existing user experience is, especially from like a centralized incumbent, right? Like in like a AWS or a GCP or something like that, and kind of what customers are getting there. And I think those particular incumbents have had like almost like more than 2 decades at this point since inception, and to kind of really sort of dial in exactly what that user experience looks like, and kind of really listen to customers and kind of innovate based on that. So I think we have a lot of those innovations or expectations from customers that we really need to kind of incorporate into our network and sort of like bring it to that same level of reliability, quality, expectation of like SLAs, things like that, like performance, that really need to kind of make it as user friendly as possible, and essentially kind of attract both developers and even players, and kind of when we're kind of add gaming into the mix, to attract them to the ecosystem and be able to do it right. And I think similarly with sort of kind of taking that notion into the decentralized gaming infrastructure space, it really kind of comes down to what cloud gaming is really competing with is like the existing sort of gaming experience today for people who just have their games locally on their PC or on their console of choice, and like really comparing it to what their experience looks like, not only in terms of like interoperability and playability with like other players, but also just in terms of like performance and latency and speed and responsiveness. So I think a lot of that will I think has to do with kind of just innovations around sort of like fundamentally it's sort of like the more physical level of the infrastructure itself, right? Like really just kind of enabling sort of more nodes like that exist at a higher quality, that are more distributed, that are closer to those end users to actually be able to play, and kind of really making that network as dense as possible and as reliable as possible. So I think it really comes down to it's not even sort of like a question of innovation. I think it's almost more of a question of sort of like maturity of the network itself. And I think as our peer-to-peer sort of like deepen more nodes that are closer to like those end gamers and users itself, I think those those particular pieces that make that experience more user friendly, cost effective, etc., are going to be are going to fall in place there.
Yeah, fair enough, Tasi. We lost you just for a slight second there, but I think we got the gist of everything that you were saying. And Andy, from your perspective, like what are some of the changes and innovations that you see that perhaps need to be optimized a little in order to make essentially this innovation that we're carrying out between our organizations like more cost effective and perhaps like a better experience for users? What are some of the things you'd like to see there?
Yeah, well, do you know, I think Tao, he basically nailed it though, from a general perspective. A lot of it is about listening to what customers are looking for rather than telling them what we have. And I think that over the next 5 years or so, we're going to listen a lot more to what they're doing. And again, the IO approach is correct. We could build. There's so many people who build amazing things, but they don't really listen to what the client sort of wants. Now, what we've heard so far from what clients are looking for, and generally what gamers and game studios are looking for, it isn't necessarily innovation that hasn't already been created, but I think it's this, as Tao said earlier, it's this ease of access. There is a bit where they want the latency to be good, they want the price to be cheap, but if we're going to go from being a Web3 gaming business into getting mainstream adoption and mainstream games in and all that kind of stuff, you either need to take away the kind of Web3 conversation, and people need to they need to think about this as, I go to a URL, I go to a website, I type in an email address, I log in with Google, I log in with Facebook, that kind of thing. They don't even realize that there's any kind of Web3 or kind of DePIN infrastructure to it. They then play the game, they earn something, they use the NFTs that are effectively in their custodial wallet via their email address and password login. They then basically will trade them in and out, they'll buy them. And then at the end of it, for us, we're thinking, how do we make it so that even to the point where people are earning money, from our nodes are basically gaming rigs that people log in with a hardware plug and play device to basically, how do they get paid? Now, obviously, for people like us who are in the Web3 space, getting paid in, YOM or getting paid in, IO, it's not really a massive issue for us. Whereas actually, for a lot of the normies, getting paid in something like that will just blow their mind. Even having to have, a Phantom wallet or a MetaMask wallet or any of these things. So we've got to make it really simple. And again, the bit for us, the way we envisage this is somebody, we'll log in at that front end as described, and at the back end, we're just doing a deal at the moment with MasterCard and a couple of debit card producers to have a debit card which people who lend us their PC will basically be able to use. Now, the way we see this is there is something like, if I remember correctly, the number is 3.3 billion users who are playing games in the world. We want to tap into all those, not just the Web3 ones. And then there are 1.86 billion PC gaming PC users in the world. Again, we want to tap into all of those rather than just the ones that do Web3. So again, it is this innovation. It's as Tao said, it's listening, but I think it's ease of access. It's enabling people to really be able to access the platform, use it, and realize almost there's no Web3 element to it. That's my feeling.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely bang on there, Andy. And when we talk about users, users are always going to be at the heart of everything that we do, and they always are going to be like the first members of our community. They're always going to be some of the first people to share their feedback. On that note, like a really hot topic is always going to be community driven innovation. And I'm really curious, since we're discussing this topic, that as we look to the future, how do you envision the role of gaming communities evolving as DePINs become more integrated into the gaming industry? Like, what specific strategies do you think are going to be more enabled to engage the community, to collect feedback, and then perhaps integrate it from a tech perspective?
Yeah. I mean, on the um, on the consolidation and collection of data, and then how we integrate it. Again, that's a that I think that that's going to come as games develop, and I think that we've got to work a way that actually there's a rewards mechanism that pays people for that engagement. And I mean, I'm gonna take a slightly different angle here. You know, the way that we look at gaming communities, really, they're very much at the heart of what we're doing and the heart of what you're doing. Because again, these people who have gaming rigs, they have, you know, that's our customer base from a GPU perspective, and you know, gamers and gaming communities are the people that actually will play the games. So, you know, we need to basically have, you know, all these people engaged and all these people earning and all these people being effectively the heart of, you know, what's happening. And I think part of this comes through gamification of everything that you do, even filling in forms, etc. And part of it comes from, you know, literally rewarding people. I mean, I'll give you an example. And interesting, do kind of come into our chat and DM us if you want to take part. But we're just doing our alpha test rollout. So we're basically rolling out on a worldwide basis our nodes, and we're paying $150 per person to do it. Now you think about that, and that's the way to actually get people to give true kind of test, you know, critique and true kind of, you know, what would they like to see. Um, there is a big bit here, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this. And well, actually, I do know what your thoughts are because I think we're on the same page in this. There is a mass here about listening to the community and not just going, yes, we want to listen, and then doing nothing with it. There is a big bit about listening to the community and then actually engaging and doing what you know what the community wants us to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, at ionet, you know, we have a huge community of quite literally hundreds of thousands of people. And you know,
Yeah.
we run these cadences of AMAs and weekly forums so that we can ensure that we're always listening to our community, because they're going to be some of the best pieces of feedback that we receive as an organization in order to become essentially a company that has community driven innovation at the very heart of it. So,
Mm.
you know, Smiral, like since you're on our tech team, like perhaps this would also be quite an interesting question for you in terms of like, if you can expand a little bit on how we at ionet utilize community-driven innovation, and foster that community engagement and feedback, and what that process looks like in some of your like technology thinking and building. Would love to kind of unpack that in more detail as well.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, we have these AMAs almost every week, and usually Gaurav is the one who, attends these calls. All of these feedback, that we get from community is actively being taken into consideration when we build out our products. And our roadmap is literally, based out of a lot of things which, our community, which are based on our community needs, right? And from a technological perspective, we also have support tickets coming in. We have our Discord. We listen to a lot of these advices, and a lot of things that the community suggests, and we are basically making sure that we are basically trying to provide a network, and which is based on people's opinion, and their feedback is being actively taken, and we build products out of that.
Yeah, super interesting there. Well, look, I'm really curious to focus on the organizations and just unpack a little bit more individually about what you guys are doing. So, you know, Andy, taking this question to you,
Mm.
I know that you guys are working on some incredible things at the moment. Would love for you to just like unpack perhaps a little bit more about like what you're building. I know you mentioned this to me earlier, and it sounds
Yeah.
incredibly exciting. But do you want to like talk to the community about like what that is, and how that potentially plays a role here?
As in what we're building. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, and again, I'll talk about obviously how it fits into IO net as well, because I think that's really, really relevant as to how we all work together. So basically, YOM YOM's been going for 4 years, and basically the first couple of years we're building out an extension of Unreal Engine which obviously, as people probably know, is Fortnite, of their SDK to enable it to integrate Web3 wallets in the front end, but also to allow it to have multiplayer running in a web browser. Now, obviously, with as I'm sure you can probably imagine, Unreal is not designed to run in a web browser, and it's not designed to be Web3 friendly. So that took a hell of a lot of time. But the interesting bit was that, as I said to you before, price and latency was a massive issue that came out from building out that front end technology, and it effectively led to us looking at, okay, at the moment, because it's built in a URL, obviously it's hosted in the GPU and CPU, etc., is in AWS. We were like, right, okay, that is super expensive, it's super laggy, it doesn't really work. So what do we do? So the guys started building out the DePIN network. Now that's then led us to looking at what is a DePIN, and the guys were effectively building it before DePIN became a trendy thing to have. Now the bolt on from that is that what we ended up doing is building out the full infrastructure to run a DePIN network, which is purely focused on cloud gaming. Now, this is where ionet has come in really well and has been a great partner for us. Effectively our network runs off solid state disks with a Linux-based operating system on it, which is what you need for running Unreal Engine in most games. Now, again, it's got a 2 terabyte hard drive that comes with it, because you can't just run on software on a URL, on software on a gaming rig. There's too much accessibility. You've got all these massive problems. But the nodes that we're rolling out at the moment are test nodes. Now, obviously, when we have spikes in locations and we have spikes in games, let's say, for example, a game goes viral, this is where we rely on ionet as our partner to be the second layer that sits behind us and allows us to scale up really fast and scale down really slow. But again, where are we? We're just doing our alpha rollout. We've got testers that are signing up at the moment, and the next stage will be for us to sell our first stage of nodes, which are fully discounted for 2024, and then we're doing 1,000 of those, and we're going to go out and sell 9,000 in Q1, which again, will enable us to run multiple games on a worldwide basis, again using ionet as the secondary support. So that's where we really are with things so far. I mean, hopefully that gives you a good synopsis. Does that sort of
Definitely.
make sense?
No,
Yeah,
that
brilliant.
makes a lot of sense, Andy. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Incredibly exciting to see that. And Tasib, a question for you. As we're like working incredibly hard building things for ionet, like who are some of the like major players in the gaming industry that you think also stands to benefit the most from adopting DePINs? And what do you think that they're missing by not exploring the options that are essentially on the table right now?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a good question. I think I think honestly, sort of like there's a variety of stakeholders within the gaming industry who probably should be exploring DePIN as, an alternative solution, right? So I think a couple different angles that I kind of think of is one, I think both of them sort of like lead back to the idea of actual like game developers and sort of like game publishing like studios. Is one essentially, I think more studios kind of like need to start looking at DePINs, and essentially sort of like as sort of like the underlying backbone of their potential cloud gaming streaming solution, whether it's through YOM or whether it's through some alternative like first party thing that they want to launch themselves. I think a lot of the benefits of using DePINs, for all the reasons that we mentioned before in terms of like latency, responsiveness, low costs, like closeness to the end user, will become evident to a lot of these studios, and I think they'll be served really well in terms of being able to kind of like use a DePIN to do that. I think another one that's pretty interesting is just I think at the intersection of sort of like AI and gaming, right? Which obviously we at ionet sort of spent a lot of time thinking about, considering it's part of our wheelhouse. Is I think we've all sort of like seen kind of like the rise of like AI agents as sort of like a narrative in the past past month or two. But I think sort of like taking that to like the next level forward, I think a lot of those sort of like AI agents will kind of become more tangible once they're sort of integrated into specific gaming experiences as well, right? And kind of really sort of increase the variability in gaming experiences that'll sort of be like driven by like LM, like, or like gaming character driven like inference workloads, which I think will also kind of start to take the question back of like, well, how do you power all these AI agents at scale globally, especially if these are all games being streamed worldwide. And I think that kind of also brings it to like the answer of potentially using DePINs like ionet to power those workloads, right? Because having all those inferences happen at scale all the time across millions of instances of games happening with users, it makes a ton of sense. Like all the benefits of sort of what we mentioned that enable the game streaming itself apply the same way to actually powering those AI agents or sort of AI workloads that will be incorporated into gaming as well. So I think yeah, so I think from that angle, that's sort of where my mind goes when and I think about sort of like stakeholders within the gaming space who could probably benefit from
Yeah.
DePIN.
No, that's totally fair, and I think that raises that answers a lot of the questions that we have. So first of all, thank you all. We're going to take two more questions from the community because I've just been getting DM'd like crazy with a bunch of questions. But we've got time for two, and I've been hand looking and picking through some of the most pertinent ones, which I think will serve the most value to the audience. So Smiral, I'm going to bring this question to you because it ties a little bit into tech before I take it to Andy and Tarsif. But the first question that I think is quite interesting for us to look at from the community, it says, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about using decentralized infrastructure in gaming? And how do you think like ionet or YOM's approach challenges or reshapes these perceptions? So Smiral, over to you, buddy.
Yeah, so for starters, I think there are quite a lot of misconceptions when it comes to, hey, how would a DePIN be a good fit for, uh, like for, uh, am I audible? Sorry, I think I lost.
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So one of the biggest misconception about decentralized infrastructure in gaming is probably the belief that it compromises performance due to its distributed nature. However, at IO, we've probably demonstrated that with decentralized networks, we can actually enhance the performance by reducing latency and increasing redundancy to ensure there's no single point of failure. Also, another common myth is that uh, these networks are considered less secure than the centralized ones. But in contrast, our approach leverages the inherent security features of decentralization, right? So we also ensure that there's transparency and data integrity while having complete security. Uh, and by pioneering in these solutions, I think IO would be able to prove that DePIN indeed is a good, it's a good fit for cloud gaming,
Yeah.
and it will be able to, basically offer superior stability, security, and the speed, the latency that is required for cloud gaming platforms.
Amazing. Yeah, makes sense. And Andy, from your perspective, like, what are
Yep.
some of the biggest misconceptions that you've also seen about like just the utilization of decentralized infrastructure?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's Smirl nailed it, by the way. Security is a massive one, and latency are the two. People people think because data centers latency is really slow, and security within data centers is relatively good, but people's natural assumption is that security within DePIN isn't. I mean, you guys are one of the only ones. We spoke to quite a few people. You guys are the only ones that actually understand the security side of the gaming and how it is different to the AI side of the gaming. I mean, we've got a node that basically means that nobody can access it except us. Whereas obviously, if you're just downloading software, then people can access it, can access games, can access the actual root drive, and then basically get in. So again, I think that's a really important one. I suppose the way I come at it slightly differently is we've had lots of so we had a really good conversation. It's like the fourth conversation with the guy who basically is the founder of a 2 billion turnover gaming company. He's actually, third owner, so that gives you a bit of concept around who he is. He's 25 years in the game, and one of the things he sort of said was he was like, he got it. And I think what he told us was that a lot of people sort of think, well, why are you bothering doing cloud gaming? It's such a small piece. Now, if you look at the overall gaming market predictions by 2030, it's something like 5 trillion overall gaming. There's actually more people game than play, than go to the cinema, watch TV, listen to music, and go to concerts. It's like 46% of the population. Now, when people put in the context of saying, well, why would we want cloud gaming? The problem is that what a lot of people do is they judge cloud gaming on what is available on a centralized function. And, what it is a very slow, very expensive product. Whereas really what we should be having, or sorry, I have to put it differently. What actually we can enable through DePIN is this kind of lower latency, totally secure and with a lower price. So again, I think this kind of, there are projections around cloud gaming being 28 billion by 2030. We actually think that as soon as people start getting their head around why cloud gaming works and why it is really strong, they'll then understand that by solving this problem of latency and price, the cloud gaming space should absolutely boom. There's no, I mean, the way we see it, there's no reason to actually have, a Sega or a PlayStation or a Nintendo, whatever the case is. We should be running everything in a URL, basically.
Yeah, fair enough. And Tarsif, I know you speak to tons of organizations and you probably come across a huge amount of misconceptions. So, just like super quickly, would love to know from you, like some of the like biggest misconceptions you've seen, and just simply why they aren't the case.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit about, kind of AI workload specifically, right? Because I actually spend a lot of my time just talking to AI/ML customers out there, to utilize our GPU network. So what a lot of what a lot of sort of end customers, especially in the AI/ML space, sort of like really misconstrue or underestimate of like what's possible with DePINs and sort of like the type of GPUs, that are in our network is sort of like what kind of workloads we can effectively service, right? So I think one of the things that's been really interesting and, kind of like a narrative that's been growing in the space is just the idea of like model training itself, right? Like actually sort of doing training runs for foundational AI ML models. So this has typically been sort of the wheelhouse of being done in large scale centralized data centers with all these GPUs sort of existing in the same space, literally plugged in with InfiniBand wires to ensure strong bandwidth and throughput, which are kind of like essential to training AI models. But over the past couple months, we've actually seen really successful training runs happen for smaller scale models, typically within kind of like the 1 billion to 10 billion parameter size. We've seen models of this size be able to be trained on a distributed network of GPUs that are spread out across multiple data centers, across multiple countries and regions, kind of coordinated in a way to, still drive the same level of results and kind of beat sort of existing training benchmarks when trained in a centralized fashion too. So I'm sure a lot of people in the audience have kind of seen a lot of the research and breakthroughs sort of coming through on that side. So I think that's been something that's been very surprising to a lot of people because, actually maybe even 12 to 18 months ago, a lot of folks in the AI space, were essentially saying that decentralized training wasn't even physically possible. And now, we're actually training models that are 10 billion parameter in size, which still a bit of a ways off from the 70B to 405B models that are sort of state of the art sort of open source models today. But I think it's just a matter of time before we get there. So that's something that has consistently sort of like surprised customers in the AI space that I've been speaking to.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Tarsif. And the final question of the day, It ties into, like, I think it's super relevant because it ties into consoles that everyone loves, right? Which is both Xbox and PlayStation. So I'm just going to do a quick round robin with all of you guys. But the final question of the day, like, people are asking, how do you see the landscape of traditional gaming platforms like Xbox and PlayStation potentially changing? And do you think, like, it's pushing them also more towards decentralized models? And like, is there a possibility that that could also affect how games are developed in the future? So Tarsif, I'm just going to quickly run that by you and just get your thoughts before moving across to Andy and Smiral.
Yeah, I think, it's an interesting question. I think it will take sort of players like Sony and Microsoft a little bit longer to kind of move towards the decentralized gaming solution than, folks like us who are sort of more on that cutting edge of this space. I could likely see, Xbox with Microsoft being its parent, kind of making sort of more of a foray into it, considering that they're part of the same company as Azure on the cloud side. But I think it's something that they'll probably need to start looking at sooner rather than later. But they'll likely wait for companies like YOM to prove out the business model, prove out the viability, build out a community, and kind of move sort of in a later stage of the adoption cycle, which might be several years out from now. At least that's my prediction.
Awesome. No, I completely agree. Andy, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah. Well, I think you're spot on there. I actually see it as probably 5 to 10 years before they start doing it. Potentially it could end up being the kind of BlackBerry of the future. I don't know if you've ever seen that, or you've seen the film on Netflix. Great business, just all of a sudden gets the market slightly wrong, and that's the end of it. I actually envisage that we'll end up with PlayStation making gaming controllers, and gaming controllers that you run on a TV through a URL. So rather than having any of the technology that you buy yourself, they're going to start producing hardware and gaming equipment as opposed to gaming consoles. That's where I would see it going. But I think we're a long way away from that. I think you're right, Tao. There's got to be a lot of adaptation. We've got to break the boundaries. You guys have got to break the boundaries. And then they're going to come along going, right, okay, the proof is there. Now it's worth us, having a look at doing it ourselves. But it's 4 or 5 years away.
Fair enough. And Smiral, just to wrap up this conversation, would love your 2 cents on that as well.
Yeah, for sure. So, uh, with such emergent trends, I could really feel that it would, empower communities and gaming communities and people who want to actually build games but don't have, access to that kind of hardware, right? So, if we start developing these games, uh, you know, if Sony provides us a platform which they can host on, decentralized infrastructure where anyone could basically come and develop games, it would also help with the entry barrier for such people, right? And it would pretty much change the way we develop games if we also plan on building on developer platforms for game development companies to use idle compute from DePINs. That would really be a great way to utilize DePINs in the cloud gaming industry. That's pretty much
Brilliant.
what it is.
Thank you for that, Smiral. Well, look, that's unfortunately all we have time for today. An incredibly interesting discussion with so much perspective. But I think for me, at least the biggest takeaway is that we're all rowing in the same direction, that technology innovation within the space is an inevitability. We all know it, we're building towards it, and we're preparing ourselves for a future where DePINs are an absolutely core component of that. So, a huge shout out to Tarsif, Andy, and Spiral for joining. Andy, thank you so much from YOM Network. Guys,
Thank
if
you.
you haven't, if you're not following us on Twitter, you're not following Tarsif, Andy, or Smiral, feel free to do so. We will also be joining YOM Network's AMAs or Twitter Spaces or some of their other events in the future. So definitely stay tuned for them. We're probably trying to do one next week. But thank you all for joining. We had thousands of listeners tuning in today for an incredibly enlightening discussion. We wish you well and have a wonderful week ahead. See you next time, guys. Bye.
Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks.